Welcome to From the Ashes, the Dungeon Crawler Network podcast all about Ashes of Creation by Intrepid Studios. Bear witness to the rebirth of the MMORPG genre from the ashes of an industry that has left the gamers behind. I am your host, Aggelos, and we are back for another awesome show, another Phoenix Roundtable with some very familiar faces you probably see down there. Amazing people from within the Ashes of Creation community. That's why I bring them on the show, because, well, I like them. Yeah, that's what happens. I like to podcast with people I like, so they keep coming on. The first person that we have on the docket today, the one, the only founder of Ashen Foundry, that would be Atropos.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Thank you, Aggelos, for having me on.
Absolutely. I did say I was going to bring you on again, so...
Yeah, you did.
yeah, that's what we do. The other person that we have here, he's my guild leader over at Dungeon Crawler Network. That would be Stormzlord. How are you?
Good. How's everybody doing?
Doing pretty awesome, because we get to talk Ashes of Creation and some pretty fun topics we have today, I think. Yeah. And finally, the one, the only, the guild leader of Sons of the Seven, the guy with that amazing swag that he wears. I'm just so jealous. How are you, man?
Doing great. Excited to talk about the game mechanics and hopeful reality that we get to play this, awesome combat game that everyone's been asking for a long time. So,
absolutely. So for those of you who are just tuning in, this is our Phoenix Roundtable, where we all get together from people from around the Ashes of Creation community, and we get to talk about whatever topics we deem necessary. And this episode is special, because the day this is being released is going to be, as I pull up here on my calendar, oh my goodness, what day is this now? Oh, there it is. Monday, the December 11th. Okay, so you're thinking to yourself, what is Monday, December 11th? That's not really that big of a deal, right? Well, you're right. The 11th is not a big deal. However, just a few days down the road, on the 15th, is the Alpha Zero start. We are finally going to get our hands, those of us with the Alpha Zero keys, we'll finally get our chance to hop in and, help test this game. So we have a couple fun things that we are going to do today. First up, I want to hit on something that's very important to me personally, as well as I'm sure a lot of the developers listening. I know Storms, he's a developer. And so Atropos, he's a web developer. He knows all about this. So we really want to talk about what it takes to be a good alpha tester. Because you guys are listening to this now, probably getting super hyped up, because in the next 5 days, if you're listening to this right on Monday, you're going to be able to hop into the game. But we have a few things we want to talk about first that you know. Finally, the other part that we are going to cover is what Alpha Zero abilities reveal about game mechanics. This is actually an amazing article that Atropos wrote up over at Ashen Foundry, and we are going to use this because he wrote it up, and now I stole it for us to talk about.
Sounds good to me.
Hey, just so anyone knows, it's with permission. No, but we are going to use it, and we're going to talk about this article. So definitely, if you want to read this for yourself, head over to ashenfoundry.com. Look for the article, What Alpha Zero Abilities Reveal About Game Mechanics, as well as the compendium, which Atropos has been working on, which has listed in an amazing format, by the way, all the different stuff that we know about the abilities that were shared with Alpha Zero. So check that out. So, let me see. Do I have any other news I have to say ahead of this? I don't think I do. I think we're good. Special shout out to our new patrons, as I've said before, Dan Johnson and Ian Mance. Thank you for supporting us over at patreon.com/Dungeon Crawler Network. You guys are amazing. I want to give you guys a shout out again, if I did not already. So there we go. All right, guys. Let's first go into what it takes to be a good alpha tester. Now, I'm going to start this whole thing off with talking about the modern MMORPG genre right now. I'm specifically looking at you, Tryon. I hope they don't sue me. They might. I don't know. I hear their games aren't doing that good nowadays, so they might need money. Good luck getting it from me. Anyway, So Tryon, we're gonna have a little sit down, as well as some other companies. I just don't mean to pull out Tryon, but they do this a lot. The idea of what an alpha test is not what modern game developers have been calling alphas lately. Okay, these things that you're buying founders packs for, I'm specifically going to pick on ArcAge and BDO because those were the two that are probably in people's more recent memory. When you were getting these games, right, and they were called alpha, you would log in. You do realize that while the company called it alpha, the games have been out in Korea for many years. I think ArcAge was, 4 years old in Korea when it came over here? Does anyone know that off the top of their head?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's been out there for a while. What this really is a localization alpha. The game is already built and functioning in other countries. What they're changing is very minimal. Excuse me. They may change a few weird things that maybe Korea has and translating, but the game was almost completely playable from a very early state. That is not what alphas originally were. All right, alphas are rough. A lot of people in AAA companies, you would not see this. You would not see this level of game. I know Telchar made a mention of that. If you want to say anything,
yeah. The typically whenever you're looking at even like on games that come out on Steam early access, they typically have all the front end user interface stuff like the login screens and the overall connectivity things hammered out either through an internal testing group or through various levels of QA, even on one that's not being localized. That kind of stuff is usually held in private because it's super unreliable. They don't know about the possibility of having connection issues across various different regions, getting the ISPs to talk to each other the right way. There's a lot of things that they have to do on the back end to get it working, and that's usually not something you see. It seems to be a trend now that there are some companies that are in the Kickstarter and kind of crowdfunding thing that want to be super transparent and allow for a much earlier than normal or much more early access to the project, even at a limited fashion, so you can see the progress from a raw ingredient state to being a final product. If you want an analogy, a lot of games that are alpha are basically being put in the oven. The ingredients are made; they're already put together for the most part. Now it has to be finished baking. Later on, they'll dress it up and make it look good. But the cake is the ingredients for true alphas are still like
let's crack the egg.
Right, exactly. That's what they're doing with this, and hopefully people keep that in mind and keep their expectations at a manageable level, because it's not something to expect the same level of delivering a product that is a normalcy for other games that are out there. So
right,
yeah, there's going to be a whole lot of management of expectations that has to occur if this is going to work out for them. Like, if you don't manage their expectations going in, it's going to blow up when people can't play. They have to understand what they're getting into, or they're going to have wild expectations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, this is going to be one of the very first times that this game is available to play in any form, right? Across the internet, the WAN, right? Like the tests that people had and were playing at PAX was a very closed local LAN system. Like that, you were not going out; it was all internal. So you should be very prepared for when you're trying to sign in. It may not sign in, and to be prepared to get a couple things for developers. One thing that I know is very interesting, they may ask you to do, is provide the error log that may generate. Okay, so you'll have to actually go to where the installation file is and grab the error log. I've actually dealt with companies that asked me to do trace routes. They gave me an address and actually asked me to go and do a trace route. So if you don't know what that is or how to do that, hopefully they'll have maybe guides for the less tech savvy people. But that might be something you may want to refresh yourself on, to provide that data to Intrepid.
Something I'd like to see Intrepid do is do some kind of like issue council system, the way that like Star Citizen does, where you can report the normal bugs get pulled in automatically, like the crash reports and stuff, but you can also go and submit things that you find that if you can reproduce it, it goes through a special curated system. So that helps them kind of hone in on some of the stuff, the things that are proving to be a consistent issue that may not be caught in an error report. Like that's that kind of peer-based review of it is a good method that I haven't seen in many other like kind of early alpha testing games like this. I'm
super interested to see how things go from a connectivity perspective. I mean, I think your words of caution are absolutely spot on. I mean, people need to be prepared for potentially nothing to work, and that's okay. I mean, this is a really, really critically important opportunity for Intrepid to have valuable learning experience and feedback and more importantly data that they can use to improve their services. But at the same time, there's been really huge strides in the last couple of years of cloud service providers making advancements that make it really easy for relatively easy for companies to deploy and to sort of bootstrap and build on the shoulder of giants. So I don't know exactly what Intrepid's using from a web services and cloud architecture perspective, but a lot of the like huge trouble that MMO studios had 5 years ago with like, we got to make sure that users can connect to our authentication server, and then we're going to forward those connections on to the actual game server that's going to interface with the client. Like a lot of these things are sort of solved problems at this point. So I kind of have an interesting. I'm interested to see to what extent it's a smooth experience versus what totally breaks. But I think people just need to be prepared that maybe it will not work at all, and be prepared to help Intrepid to diagnose the issues in a constructive way. Absolutely, and I definitely agree with you, Atropos. With that said, I now have to disagree with you, only because I know there's been a lot of. We actually did an episode way back, was episode 5, Unreal Expectations, where we talked about the Unreal Engine and people saying how Unreal 4 hasn't made MMOs, which is true, even though Unreal 3 did a ton. Anyway, Intrepid has already come out and said that they are actually doing a proprietary backend for their networking. So you're right, there are different cloud services, but if they're testing their own netcode, it hasn't been tested. It's not tried and true. Absolutely. So, this is something people need to go into. And I've done a lot of indie MMOs. It's kind of like my passion. It's what I really like to do. And I won't give the names of some of them because, they're different projects. And obviously everyone has different levels of, I don't want to say competence, but different levels of staff and expertise in certain things, especially if you had someone who's been working on games for a long time, they might bring that in. But one of the alpha tests I was in that was very early, like the very first public alpha that I was in, it was us spending 3 or 4 hours just trying to get through the login server. And then once you were in, there wasn't anything to do. You could kind of look around, but that was what the test was. We were just trying to get as many people on the server as possible to stress it. I think Alpha 0 is planned to have a good bit more than that, obviously, because they've already had some sort of playable at PAX West that they're going to be using, at least as a raw base. But you definitely have to keep an eye on those connectivity issues. Another thing that people tend not to do is bug report. Right? Your alpha testing, you need to bug report, and there's a couple steps to bug reporting, which is actually very important that you do. And that is when you find a bug, take down everything you were doing up until that bug happened, right? Even if it doesn't feel like it's, go back a couple minutes and go, okay, I was here, and here, doing this, and this, and try to create, after you know what you have done in the past couple of minutes, go back and try to recreate it. You should always submit it, especially even if you can't recreate it. But if you can recreate that bug doing the exact same steps, that's awesome. And that information should be provided to Intrepid via whatever means they're going to present to us to report bugs. I know some games do special forms that are locked down to alpha testers and things like that. But that is something that is very important. And I know I stress this
all the time. I work in a tech environment. I'm a system administrator for a company, and whenever people call me with bugs, I'm like, what were you doing up until this bug happened? I need to know step by step so that I can try to reproduce it back in my lab to fix the problem. If you tell me it doesn't work, I'll be like, then I can't help you. I need more information, right? So definitely try to do that. That is something that is very important, and it's a good troubleshooting steps to get into. I know Atropos, we were doing that a lot with Ashen Foundry, trying to break and repeat steps over and over and over again to try to make sure things worked and what didn't.
Yeah, I got some good help from some of these guys before we put up the new site. It's built on like a new platform I hadn't used before, so there was a lot of learning to do. To piggyback on what Aggelos said, I mean, I think he's spot on. I guess in my experience and from working with other developers, I know one thing that can be super valuable when you're submitting bugs is if you think there might be any ambiguity about the issue that you're reporting, include an extra sentence or two on what it was that you expected to happen. Sometimes it's actually really hard for the developers to, it's hard to reproduce the bug, but it's also sometimes hard to contextualize the feedback to understand what was it that the user thought was going to happen. Is it just like a miscommunication? Is it that the UI doesn't give the right expectation to the player and actually the system's working as intended? Knowing what it was that the player expected to happen and then something unexpected happened is really useful to the person who's trying to address your feedback. So think about including that as well when you're talking about what you were doing.
I'd like to kind of jump off on that too. Make sure that, at least I think that what you should do is not go off on a more general suggestion tangent during bug reporting, meaning like, oh, I don't like the way the combat is because of this and this and this. That's not the place for that. The suggestion stuff will be through a different method, as well as like a feedback survey that they send us for how to improve things. The bug reporting is a place for you to try to replicate an issue or show what you expected, like you said, an expected value or expected thing to happen and why it didn't get to that, not a general like, oh, I don't like the warrior combat or whatever. That's not the place for that. So
absolutely, and that I'm glad you pointed that out, because a lot of times people will try to report things they don't like as bugs. Bugs should be treated as something very, very logical, very literal. Like your feelings should not get in the way of this. It's cold hard facts. That's all you need. And obviously, I know during the ESO alphas and betas, pretty much every time a test was over, Atropos and I can attest to this, we got like 8 pages worth of surveys to fill out about what we thought about the specific test, what they were trying to accomplish. Did we experience it? Like I know one of the ones that stuck in my head was after I got through it, they were trying to test a dungeon mechanic or something like that. And they were like, did you experience it? Yes or no. And if you didn't do it during the alpha, it just said, thank you for your input. If you did, it opened up 20 other pages worth of information that you had to fill out. That's where you get a chance to fill in your feedback of, hey, I hate warrior combat, because I think it sucks. And then, whatever, because that's when they're asking for feedback. It's not a bug.
So I guess I'll jump in as well. So
awesome.
I haven't tested from a game perspective like this, but all the testing I've done in the past, when you approach something, not only are you asking the person who's testing it to provide you their expectation, you have to also give them the expectation of the test. What was the result supposed to be, so they know what to expect. That way they'll know, well, that wasn't what I expected. If it's an obvious bug, that's one thing, but if it's this was this way versus that way, it may just be your opinion, like you noted, and not the expectation of the test. And that's a very important part no matter when you test.
Nope, that you're right there. I mean, that's one of those things. If someone goes, hey, I fell through the world, but that's all they gave you, it's like, well, what were you trying to do? Oh, I was trying to click on a market board. Well, then you probably shouldn't have fallen through the world. It's probably a geography issue. Oh, I fell through the world. Oh, yeah, it's because I ran up to the top of the map and I'm actually trying to get outside the map. That's why I fell through the world. Well, you weren't supposed to do that in the first place. Let's block that. That is that expectation of what you expected to happen versus what really happened. Are you trying to get outside the world? Well, if you fall through the geometry, it makes sense. Where did you fall through? We'll patch that so you can't do it again. So there you go. All right, guys, I think that's enough of the dry, boring stuff, but I felt like that was an important important public service announcement, since a lot of people are going to be hopping into Alpha Zero, and I don't think people should go in blind or, you know, really thinking that this is going to be what, you know, some of these AAA studios are calling alphas nowadays, because those aren't alphas, but that's a whole other tangent.
I love all the threads on the forum. Will there be a character wipe?
Okay, there will be a character wipe. There might be a character wipe while you're playing, actually.
I've seen at least 10 threads asking if there's going to be a character wipe.
There will be more character wipes than you wipe your bum after going to the bathroom. Let's just say it like that.
There will be game wipes. We let them uninstall the game and reinstall it 3 times in a session.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, and another thing, there might not be a patcher. You might have to re-download the game every single time when they release a new build. Just FYI, that does happen, especially if they don't have their patcher server ready. So,
quick note on that. I don't know. Just super quick note. I don't know if you guys saw this, but Steven, a couple days ago, he did post a screenshot of their patcher that they're hopefully going to have included in Alpha Zero. So, like, I mean, we'll see if it actually works or not, but it has like a progress bar for like showing that you're like downloading stuff, and you know, it has like a little like server status indicator and stuff. So they might have some. They'll hopefully have some like basic functionality around that, but you know, we'll see how it works in action.
And a lot of this may be because of some of the team members they picked up. Like, I know we did a couple news articles way back a while ago saying about the new hires, and they have picked up a couple people with a lot of MMO experience, which is for the plus. But like I said, the patcher may not work. We may not get that. I know even and I can say this because I don't think it was under alpha, but the Camelot Unchained first alphas didn't have a patcher at first. It was re-downloading, and that had Mark Jacobs, who's been doing MMOs for like 30 years now, or however long it's been, like forever.
Right. And about the same time Camelot Unchained development started.
Oh. Hey, we have a Star Citizen backer on the cast today, so you probably don't want to
shade all around.
Yeah, there's lots of that. Anyway, all right, let's go ahead and move right on into the big topic: is what Alpha Zero abilities reveal about game mechanics. Really excited because we're going to get our hands on this. So, Atropos, you want to give us just a brief summary of what you were trying to show from the article before we dive right on in?
Sure. So, I am a big game mechanics nerd, so I really like game systems, RPG systems, game design.
Please use the term that you said I had to find.
Oh, neckbeard?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I'm not as neckbeardy as you, though, Aggelos, or you, Telchar. I don't know what Storms is rocking. He's probably Gandalf up there.
It's just jealousy. That's what that is.
Yeah. No, but I do really love game mechanics and talking about mechanics and thinking about like RPG systems and different ways to build and to balance. And so when they did the live stream back on like, I don't know, it's like not the Halloween stream, the one before that, it was maybe October 15th or so. They spent like almost the entire stream just like reading through the list of abilities that were going to be in Alpha Zero, and they skimmed through a couple of abilities, but like by combining that information with what was in the build at PAX, and then kind of like trying to find the common threads between like common mechanics that showed up in different places, you can actually piece together a lot of information about like what does the overall combat system that they're building for the game look like. So the first thing I wanted to do was like actually just record all that information and try to like organize it in a structured way. And yes, I know like this is super premature because like this is Alpha Zero and so much of this is going to change. But my bet is that there's a lot here that at least shines a light on the direction that they're building in for their game systems, and they're not going to like drastically reinvent everything. So some of this will be the way that they're building towards for launch. So so this article was just a way to kind of dig into that and to try to summarize For readers in the Ashes community, the way that, I was thinking about things and some of the connections that I was seeing in the ability data. And, I'm obviously really interested to hear what you guys think and hear from all your listeners as well. Like once this gets posted up, I'll be really excited to read all the comments of like what people think about these systems.
Right. Absolutely. And of course, if anyone has and wants to write in to the show, we do have several emails. So those of you who have emailed in, don't feel like I am ignoring you. That sits for a very specific time and segment of this show. So we will get to that in the future. So don't feel like I've gotten everyone's emails. They're all still sitting in my queue. They will be answered. So we'll probably hit those up at some point. But you can head over to dungeoncrawlernetwork.com. There's a contact us. Just fill out the form and pick the show, and it'll go to us there. So that would be great. Of course, you can always comment also on the video if you are watching on YouTube. All right. So one of the first things they showed off is showing about combat resource pools. And I know some people are like, well, makes sense, right? Well, not really, because not every game has the same ideas of what combat resource is. Most every game does have health and mana like this game does, but a lot of games have different abilities or different resource pools. I know ESO had a couple at the start, and it narrowed down, but they had the health, stamina, magicka. Guild Wars 2 had health and magicka, and then endurance, and then, or not magicka, but mana. And then they got rid of mana altogether in later builds, and it's just pretty much health and endurance at that point. But one thing I really wanted to focus on here is focus, actually. That just tied in. This idea is like what a lot of you have seen during the PAX West combat is you'll see the idea of the quick time event. And if you haven't seen that footage, we actually do have some of it over on our YouTube, youtube.com/dungeoncrawlernetwork. You can look at that and watch through that if you haven't seen it. That was brought to us by Sinbad, so thank you to him for that. The reason why I want to bring up focus is because of the way the QuickTime event is working currently. Is if you've seen it, you have that little bar with that little smaller bar in it that if you hit it perfectly, it combos to the next part and builds focus and allows you to use this focus on these ultimate type abilities. This was a system that ESO and Atropos, this would be great for you at this point. ESO had this very thing that they called the finesse system very early on in alpha. Did you get a chance to experience finesse?
I did, yeah. I was able to play the game. Fortunately, I was lucky to be able to play ESO from a very early stage, where it had actually a number of interesting mechanics that, for various reasons, didn't ultimately make it into the final game. The finesse system was one that was actually really cool. I personally quite enjoyed it. The way that it worked in ESO was that you were rewarded with this combat resource when you successfully did sort of skillful maneuvers in combat, anything that required an element of timing or to react in the appropriate way to something that your enemy did. So if like he's casting a spell and you bash to interrupt at the right time, or you block an incoming melee attack and then counterattack, like doing things in sort of the like skillful gameplay way, you would generate finesse, which would ultimately be the combat resource that you would spend on your ultimate ability, which did end up going into the final game. Ultimately, in ESO, they changed the way that the ultimate abilities work, so you're just sort of passively generating this ultimate resource just by being in combat, regardless of whether you're playing skillfully or with finesse or otherwise. But, it's interesting to see in Ashes the way that there's a lot that sort of mirrors that, because what we know about the initial implementation of focus is that you generate it when you successfully combo. Mm-hmm. So there is a sort of skill element in terms of the rate at which you can generate focus. And if you're using your weapon ability more frequently, and if you're landing your combos more frequently, then your rate of focus generation would be higher than a player that's, just rotating their, ability rotation. So, it'll be interesting to see how that plays once more people get their hands on it, and if that's a system they end up keeping, or whether they end up ultimately, making these focus spenders, earned in a different way by the time the game gets to launch. We'll see.
Do you remember why they changed the ultimate gain from finesse to a flat stat that you just earned? through combat? Did they give a reason, or did they just say? I think I'm trying to remember.
I think with a lot of things like this, I love the folks at ZeniMax, but I do have to say I think they didn't give rationale for some of the decisions they made, and I think that's one thing that in retrospect was quite frustrating. But
like
the two things that did stick with me was that there did seem to be a disparity in the ability to generate finesse between melee characters and ranged characters, in that in the initial builds of the game, bow users and staff users were at a little bit of a disadvantage because they didn't have as much opportunity to do those skillful actions in combat. The second thing was that I think, some people just weren't a big fan of needing to focus on that side of gameplay. And I think they observed that once they were doing some of the larger tests, people weren't using ultimate abilities as much as they expected. And I don't know if that was an awareness thing or just people hadn't learned the system yet, but either way, they kind of pulled the plug on that on that system.
I kind of want to bring this to Telchar next. Storms, you can weigh in if you want. But this one, the reason why I want to bring this to Telchar is we've seen a lot of complaints about the QTE system. And obviously from some people who are like, I can't do it for whatever reason, whether it be a latency related issue or some other perceived issue that they have, are real or perceived, I guess I should say. Do you feel like the QTE system may have may get scrapped at any point, like what ESO did, or do you think Intrepid will actually keep it?
I feel like that. This is just, again, my personal experience was the more familiar you get with it, the more it made sense, especially if there is a reasonable amount of pattern expectation that they might build into it. Because, like, if you think about it in terms of like a fighting game, there is a specific rote mechanical action that you have to do to reach those combos. Having it being based on like an RNG kind of thing is kind of where those things could come into a problem. Like if it's a pattern that has like a range of motion randomization, but it's always at like a certain period, so you have kind of a pace of combat, makes it so you don't really have to always look at that little bar, which, later on, if it remains the way it is and it's random, people are going to be, depending on however they change the graphics and the interface for it, it could be so distracting that people won't be able to dodge mechanics effectively, or that kind of thing. So I feel like what it might trend to is more of a timing-based thing that has a margin for error and an effectiveness based on how hard you hit to the center. So like you hit it on the front edge, it's like marginally effective. You don't hit it at all, you miss. You hit it on the first part, it's like quarter effective, and then sequentially decreasing and then or increasing and decreasing as you potentially miss the window. But that is always within a pattern based on your weapons characteristics, the augments that you have, the other things like that determine where those windows always pop up. Because being random, like truly random, I don't see it lasting for forever. It'll get too frustrating when people have to study it constantly and try to play the game. So,
right.
I think you're going to run into situations. This is my opinion, that you're going to run into situations similar to animation canceling in ESO, where the casual player is going to go, "What are you talking about? I did this rotation. I did it this way. I don't have time to be looking at all this finesse stuff." This is going to be the part. If they stick with it, I understand. But if they don't, that could be a reason why they don't.
I'm glad you brought up animation canceling and Storms. You pretty much read my mind exactly, because I was actually going to try to bring you into the conversation with animation canceling. But a lot of people, the casuals in ESO, hate animation canceling because it is kind of hard to actually do. And the disparity between DPS levels of someone who ignores it and someone who does it even marginally well is not even close. I'm talking like almost double the DPS of someone who can actually, someone who ignores versus someone who can do it. It's like double. It's not just a couple percent. It's significant. But tying a little bit to what Telchar was saying, the thing with animation canceling is it was a skill that you could learn, or muscle memory that you could learn, because it wasn't random. There was specific times during an animation where you could cancel it. Specifically, I can talk about, if anyone's played ESO, the biting jabs ability from the Templar. The way you knew the animation could be canceled is he would do his attack with the spear, you jab forward, and the final lunge, he would step forward, and when you saw his foot go back is when you could cancel it. So you could actually kind of memorize that rotation, if you will, to get animation correct, right? You knew when it was coming to get that animation cancel and save yourself that time. So that took the random element out. You just had to learn when in the animation it could safely be canceled that you got the full effect. So
I'd like to I think we talked about this maybe on the PAX recap video as well as one of the possibilities based on the way the augment system might affect these now greater. We know how these things are going to go. I think that, the timing window thing has a lot of ways of doing maybe some kind of stance modularity where you drop an augment in that changes it to be more like a quick jabs thing or sweeping attacks. And that's the kind of personal choice that you can change to get your personal flavor for your auto attack, whatever you want to call it. That could just be like a thing that you memorize as your focus generation. It still requires something. You can't just do it. Some people can do it automatically. They do it so much they get used to it. But it still does require that level of personal investment. And then it may not also always be the best stance for the situation, the best augment, whatever. You might need to have it switch it up to meet the challenge. So that's the way I see it. So
absolutely. Did anyone have anything else they want to talk about with combat resources? I mean, as of right now, that was my big thing.
I have one comment that I thought was pretty interesting. I'm curious what you guys think. Just about mana. I mean, I know you mentioned a lot of games have mana, but not all games treat that sort of resource the same way. I mean, if you think about, for example, in a game like Guild Wars, where you might have a resource for your class, or a game like ESO, how long does it take? If you run out of that resource, how long does it take before you're, at full power again? And what's your recovery time? What's your ability to sustain? And you contrast that with, with older games like a Dark Age of Camelot or an EverQuest, where, if you go out of mana, you have to rest for some non-trivial amount of time. It'll be interesting to see what interpretation of mana does Intrepid take. Is it something that you can burn through it in a couple of seconds, but it'll be back to full a couple of seconds later? Or is it something that you might run out of it if you're in prolonged combat for 3 minutes, and if you run out of it, you're going to have to rest for a minute or so afterwards to, before you're back to full again. And I think that is going to have a big influence on the role that these abilities, which cost mana, are going to end up playing in combat. Are these things that you're going to be able to spam at will, or are you going to have to be very strategic about when should I use this ability versus, when should I conserve that resource? Other games have said, we want to have those sorts of interesting trade-offs, but then ultimately, when a player gets really geared and really skilled, equipped up, you can refill your mana bar instantly, and there's no longer any meaningful trade-off. So I think it'll be really interesting to see which direction they go. There are a couple of abilities in the game already that are confirmed to provide a mana heal, so a way for people to do something to deliberately recover their mana. So that, to me, at least suggests that maybe they're going the route where this isn't something that is a resource you really quickly recover and you cycle through really rapidly. If you need some ability to more proactively regenerate that pool, I don't know what you guys think or what your read of this is.
My take on it is that there will be combat regeneration, which is a very muted level based on maybe a spirit or something like that, some kind of stat that has a passive regeneration, and then the effects like the mana heal will be a way of doing that in combat. But out of combat, I think the kind of theme park meme of World of Warcraft mages, you just drink water every fight. You're just drinking water. Your character would be a big boat by the time it was. So that's the kind of joke about that. If you're constantly having to eat or drink after every single pace between combat, it's kind of that's not really, that's kind of, what's the point of that? It's kind of silly if you ask me. So the in combat mana regeneration should be something that you strive for. That's a stat you could try to seek, whereas the out of combat thing you reset, perhaps you know, like, because if you take like the D&D approach to that, like, you know, you may consume something that has such the cooldown kind of thing is how you limit the overuse of the abilities. Like, you know, I don't think that the 10-minute plus long ultimate cooldowns that like WoW used to have is really a way of doing that. But, you know, it's a really interesting way of making people be strategic, like you said. So
go ahead. Sorry.
I was actually just going to rely on the fact that with, you know, they could do something along the lines of the Guild Wars 2 route, where they wanted to keep the flow of combat going, right? So in combat, you would have very minimal regeneration, very minimal. But after combat was over, if you were out of combat for X amount of seconds or however long they determined, you refilled almost instantly.
Recover really quickly.
Oh, yeah, it was like nuts fast. Just because they didn't want you to have to sit for 10 minutes like the old EQ and stuff like that. I'm curious if they're going to go that route with keeping combat going and minimizing the need of resting every 5 seconds. The other thing that was kind of interesting, which I'm curious about, and one of the things that I'm not really sure why this wasn't, I guess, I don't want to say brought up, but do you think since they don't really have an auto attack, do you think the number 1 skill, which is quote unquote the auto attack, will it require resource at all, or is that spammable?
Should be spammable.
You know, like, even if your resources are down, right? Like, you have no mana to do your other abilities, you can still do your 1 combo and keep fighting.
That's my expectation, is that the weapon ability is free to use. Now, it could be, you know, we know that certain class combinations and certain progressions will allow you to augment that auto attack chain. Maybe there's certain combo abilities you can link into that chain that would have a mana cost if you trigger them. But I suspect that they will definitely allow you to, you know, use that weapon ability at any point in time. I mean, one thing that was interesting to me from PAX, and again, that's pre-alpha, so probably too early to draw any meaningful conclusion from, but the cooldowns that they had on the PAX abilities were pretty long enough that I didn't myself or really see anyone who was playing the game ever have any issue with running out of mana, because you simply couldn't use enough abilities fast enough to actually like deplete that pool. It's kind of interesting because some games rely on cooldowns as a way to have combat trade-offs. Some games rely on a resource to have combat trade-offs. Intrepid seems to be wanting to have both, but it's not yet clear to me, you know, to what extent they're going to be relying on cooldowns and to what extent they're going to be relying on mana cost.
So here's a kind of combat resource thought. What if you have a choice for, like, you know, I'm going to bounce off my stance idea, or like augment that determines your swings. Maybe there is like a way of doing that regenerates. If you successfully complete it, you get like a percentage of your mana back for completing that. So like maybe you know, after every complete 3 combo system for the mage, you regenerate 5% of your mana or something, or 10% of your mana, some number. Then that it reinforces doing both. You gain the ultimate focus, which will then be able to be used because you regenerated the mana, as well as kind of brings in the concept of like timing windows for synergies with raid groups and stuff. Like, let's say there's some kind of like damage amp thing, like everybody can all use at the same time. So like in the interim, you don't want to just continue to spam your abilities and be out of mana. You want to try to use it all like really rapidly at some window, like when the grade leader says do it, you know, like bam, everybody goes, you know. So they're sitting there regenerating, throwing out their lightning bolts, wait with the auto attack, and then right at that perfect timing when the boss gets stunned or something, or like the transition phase, everybody blows their mana and then recovers it again at the next opportunity, you know, over time. So
right. You know, and ESO picked this up again. Remember when they switched the heavy attacks to actually restore a resource? It was them trying to figure out a way of, okay, everyone can auto attack or, you know, do their swing at any point. I don't see modern MMOs, at least not the ones who are going for more of a modern approach, picking up kind of what EverQuest 1 or Daok used to do, where there were times where when you were out of resources, you could do nothing. You literally just were like, I'm done. I'm just going to sit here now. Like, you actually had to sit in combat because there were times you could do nothing.
Seeing the mana heal that it did come up in the article, which was very intriguing to me, that it compared to some of the ESO stuff where you can have stamina thrown to you, where you get the blue balls coming through, where you have the magic reset to you, tells me that they're going to want to keep a heavy action combat as opposed to a strategic combat where you could just run out and you got to sit back for a couple minutes. Somebody should be able to feed you more mana, at least based on what I've seen here.
Right. And that's where group synergy comes into this. Like, and ESO did this really well with group synergy, where there were certain abilities that you could do that you could not personally benefit from because you could not interact with it with their synergy system, but others could. I'm specifically thinking like you said, the Magicka orb for for Magicka, or the Templar blazing spear ability.
Spears, yeah.
That you could consume for stamina. Like, those were things that you could not use your own spear, but you could use other Templars, or, other people could use it. And it would be curious to see if, when they release the class information and different class abilities, if there are class synergies or group synergies that would allow you to help with this resource regeneration.
That could be the role of the non-healer support as well.
Yeah,
the bard is not really, maybe he has little small heal over times, but the other effects are more regeneration of combat resources. And the other point I wanted to bring up was like potions and consumables that are in combat and out of combat too, like well-fed buff, or referencing an older video, maybe there's a tavern buff that, where you gain an extra tick per period of that of the regeneration because you spent the time to do that, which allows you to have more time on target or whatever. Just, some ways to think about. Right.
Moving away from the standard resources, we're going to start moving into some attribute related stuff. And I think this next section here is kind of interesting because I don't know if we really know much about this. I think at one point someone linked me a live stream of when Steven was playing his mage, and it brought up a screen that looked like it had primary attributes, or at least somewhere where you could put standard RPG elements like strength, dexterity, intelligence. I can tell you right now, one of the things that I hated most about Skyrim was when they took away the RPG elements of strength, dexterity, and it's like you put points into health, stamina, magicka, and that's pretty much what happened in ESO as well. They followed the Skyrim route. Yep. Where you had your 3 resources, and then by putting it in stamina, it would affect your physical crit and your physical damage and things like that. But it wasn't near as complex. Are we thinking? And here's a quote. They actually said that you have base stats. First growth variable includes your race. The second growth variable involves your primary class decision. Your third growth variable is your secondary class. So that's telling us that there are stats. Are we actually going to see primary stats such as strength, dexterity, intelligence? And how customizable do you guys think this will be? Is it just going to be a flat growth rate as you level? Or are we going to get attribute points like old RPGs where we'll actually be like, I want more strength, or I want more dex, and have it affect? Because I know in older games, and this may not be the case, and it may also be the case, strength not only increased your weapon damage, but increased your carry capacity. Dexterity not only increased your crit chance, increased your dodge chance. Intelligence increased your magicka damage and possibly your magicka regeneration.
And your learning rate.
Whereas willpower or spirit would increase your overall mana pool. Intelligence would make your spells hit harder and possibly regenerate faster, but it didn't increase your mana pool until your willpower or spirit went up. What are your guys' thoughts?
I think that they're going to have. I think it'll be like a more traditional RPG where you'll have a set of 7 different characteristics that you will want to specialize in to make that specific archetype work better. So tank wants strength and endurance, and you go on that and you seek those out on gear pieces. I feel like that's that method is a proven method. If you try to do the kind of more quasi, like your choice thing, it makes things a little harder to balance, as well as makes gear opportunities for advancement a lot harder for people to kind of justify. You know, it's one of those things like, how do you have what's the difference between tiers of gear? You know?
Aggelos, you look like you had something on the tip of your tongue. You want to?
I'm curious, and I kind of want a little bit of refinement from Telchar. Are you just referring to the individual stat allocation or just gear allocation?
I'm talking about both. So, okay. Like, you know, the quote says, like, it's more we're talking about like your base stats. The base thing will be determined by those three things. In addition to that, I feel like the gear, as well as possibly like a gems, you know, there's other ways of min-maxing that whole thing. But I feel like the traditional stat allocation system is the way that they're going to go based on Steven's history with D&D and his knowledge, like, you know, his love of that game, and letting the kind of more traditional definement of what like a mage is a intelligence main, spirit, you know, whatever they want to call it. It has like the specific attribute is the best for that. That goes into the class hybrid combinations where it's like kind of a dual role thing, like, you know, mage tank or tank mage. Maybe that's where the gear difference changes, where they might seek strength and intelligence, which makes it so there's not really any heavy plate armor with intelligence on it, but there might be like a heavy shield with that's like, doesn't, you know, something like that that's made for, it has a strength and intelligence component. Atropos is aware of this in how Path of Exile is, with the way the attribute distribution is, and sometimes there's items that you wouldn't expect to be capable of helping something work just by design. So it lets them kind of be a little more open in the freedom of equipping the various different subset classes that they have within the game is based on an attribute definition of what the attribute does.
So I sort of agree on that, but digging a little bit further based on what I saw in the article, there's a very minimal amount of passive abilities in comparison to others, which means if we're going to have differences, they may have to occur in like those 7 whatever attributes, right? Strength, etc. Because there's just not that many in what they have in the particular classes that we see now. Now the race may change that, but I think they got to give, or they would want to give the user the ability to adjust that, and they're going to give it somewhere.
My thought is, one thing that I'm torn on is the ability of, just like D&D being able to move your stat points around, or not move your stat point, but being able to select where stat points go. I feel like in so many games, like, gear is one thing for choosing, and you can fluctuate, and you can change your entire character based on gear. Like what Telchar was saying, like, putting on that strength intelligence gear makes you more of a spell sword than, you know, straight on anything else. But that can be easily picked up and put off, right? When you add stats yourself, like when you level up and you get 10 points to distribute among themselves, the real mystery in that, and this is where I'm kind of like, I could give it or take it, because eventually it becomes a null point, because the mystery's at the beginning, before any of us theory crafters really get our hands on it and dig into the numbers. Because eventually there becomes a meta. If you're a tank, this is what you want. You put 10 points here, 5 points here, blah, blah, blah. This is your best. Your best, because there's often diminishing returns. Do you guys see a way of being able to add points while still making every point meaningful? Like, diminishing returns, I think, are one thing. Like, that's awesome. But they do that in order to curb power. But at another time, that kind of breeds the meta of, this is what you're running, this is where you're going. Whereas having secondary stats or moving things around of, like, I'm a warrior, but why would I want intelligence at all? Well, maybe intelligence allows you to learn more abilities, so you think to yourself, well, how many abilities do I effectively want? And that's where the personalization comes in. I have a build in mind, I only need these X amount of abilities. I only need 5 points in intelligence, right? Like,
I think that, yeah, I think one of the what I see happening is there will be a primary and then a secondary stat, like, but they may be determined off of combinations of the thing, like, so like strength and intelligence combines to be a different thing that you can prop up with better gear or maybe talents or something like that, where it's like a special, like a level, you know, it's a different thing outside of your character's growth, or there's other ways of manipulating that. So like, you know, the primary ones are like your primary colors or whatever. They're the mixing pot, and then you get to kind of choose yourself. Like maybe there's some kind of funny. The meta always shifts, right? For a time, there will always be it's impossible to design something that's not going to have a min-maxed capacity. Like how far does that? Is that like, you know, is there 5% of the builds that are possible, or is it 10%, 20%? What's the acceptable number? You know, like you have to have a certain point where there is a maximum power.
Right.
I don't feel like it's fair to have people that want to spend all the time to not be able to just differentiate themselves in terms of their damage numbers, or like possibly a unique build without having that kind of differentiation there. So
I really desperately hope that they have attributes in this game. I mean, I hope that this quote, as well as that, you know, sort of leaked screenshot, implies that they're going down that route. I'll be, you know, I think Intrepid's shown really good judgment so far in you know, some of the stuff they've showed. So I'm hopeful, but I really hope there's attributes. I hope that as the player, you have some ability to influence those, certainly through gear, but, you know, also possibly through allocation. I think it just makes the character development process so much richer and so much more interesting. And above all of that, I really hope they have, you know, meaningful trade-offs. And by that, I mean, you know, I hope they have enough attributes that are useful for enough things that, you know, you want more than just one. You want more than just two. You know, yeah, maybe there's one or two that are really the primary, most impactful attributes for your class, but, you know, you don't want to just put everything into strength, because if you don't have any dexterity, you like miss a lot, or you never dodge, or, you know, I just really hope that they make stats universally useful, in ways that means that every build might want some stats, and it's really up to the player to think about like how they want to handle those trade-offs. And you know, who knows, that means that maybe someone can come up with a really awesome build idea that uses some item or some stat allocation that people hadn't thought of, and they can find a way to, you know, to do something clever and to do something effective. So I'm hopeful.
Kind of break, so like the usefulness of the stats could be different for each class. Like, you know, it could be like, you know, like in World of Warcraft as an example, like Druid's main stat is Spirit. Like that's the one that they get, that they bonus. Like there's a bonus for that in their talent trees. Like it gives them an extra on that. So like perhaps they could do something with the stats, such as you're a mage, your main stats are intelligence and spirit with a little bit of endurance or whatever you want to call it. But let's say there's another multiplier on there for having strength. Perhaps the strength asset makes your spell have like a knockdown effect or something. Like it has a stunning effect, because for something like that, you know, it's like it has an extra on another little kick on top, that if someone, like you said, wanted to do some kind of funny build, they might be able to find that threshold point where it's like, well, I need 200 strength. That's normally way out of the way, but if I get to this point, it makes my new AoE build like a perma-stun build or something like that. You know, it's like that threshold combination of multiple different things lets people find that asymptote where the intersection line between the different abilities themselves and value things. Another one to bring up could be like a range of, like, you know, there's a fall off range or something for accuracy. Like better agility for a ranger would, you know, make him hit harder, but he needs to be well aware, so intelligence lets him have a better accuracy. So like that's the kind of stuff you can think of. So
right. And you actually kind of segued us right into our next article, but we're out of time. Guess what? Sorry, guys. But actually, this is, I'm going to get these guys back together here, and we're going to probably push out another episode in the same week. I know, it's weird, right? Right before. So we'll probably not have an episode on the following Monday, but we'll probably have it earlier in the week so we can continue this. But keep that in mind, that primary stats affecting something like secondary attributes and combat modifiers. That's where we're going to pick up on our next episode. So, guys, where can people find you, Atropos?
You can find me at Ashen Foundry. AshenFoundry.com. It is a community site, a forum, a resource for Ashes of Creation, and we're a publishing platform where if you have a YouTube video or a Twitch stream or a podcast, or you just have a big idea that you want to write up and feature it in an article where you can share it with the community, we have a nice platform where you can do that, and we'd be happy to promote your work. We have a growing community. We're going to have lots of tools to sort of support and enrich the gameplay experience with Ashes of Creation. So hopefully eventually game integrations, sort of API integrations, things like that. But for now, we're just here to follow along and enjoy the ride, and build some stuff to help keep everybody excited about the game. So please check us out.
Definitely check them out. Awesome site. I'm there right now.
Ooh.
It opens as one of my home pages, because I do multiple.
Oh,
but
the feels.
It does. All right, and Storms.
So I'm going to steal your thunder and say you can find me at dungeoncrawlernetwork.com. As the co-guild leader of the guild we're putting together for Ashes, you can fill out an application, and then Aggelos will look at that and peruse it and read it, and hopefully call you about it, and then we'll see where we go from there.
There you go. See if I like you. I don't know. Yeah. See, right now I'm the gatekeeper, and that's not good. Anyway, and Telchar.
So I'm the guild leader of Sons of the Seven. We're a mercantilism and political focused guild for Ashes of Creation exclusive. If you've been watching any of the previous podcasts, I've been talking about some of the more heavy meta topics in regards to the things we're interested in. If those are something you want to talk about more or are interested in joining us, feel free to reach out to me on Discord or check out our website, sonsoftheseven.shifter.com. Hope to see you at the next episode.
There you go. All right, and of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Aggelos, AGGELOS_WOF. Find everything we do, dungeoncrawlernetwork.com. That's where you can find links to all of our social media, all that fun stuff. YouTube, Twitch, iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, wherever you find your podcast. If you have enjoyed this show, which I don't know why you wouldn't, because I have awesome guests, feel free to head on over to iTunes, our Google or Apple podcast now, and leave us a review, because that lets people know that we are a real podcast, that we say real words, and it never really matters. But you guys still listen. I don't know why. It's pretty cool. Anyway, thank you so much, guys. We hope you enjoyed this episode of From the Ashes, and we will be back sooner than next week for another episode. See you in Ashes of Creation, everybody.